Morning, everyone. Welcome to our annual spring training. This should be a good time. So, the first thing that we're going to talk about today is testing chemicals, interpreting test results. That sounds like a real page turner, huh? It's actually going to be pretty fun because we got some information in there that should be um, eye-opening, light bulb illuminating, just good stuff to know for you and your staff at the store. So, why do we test? Matt, why do you test?
Hey, you know what? You got to make sure that the water's balanced because if it's not, there's all kinds of issues that happen, including the growth of contaminated biofilm, cloudiness, scale. You can make it so it's so the water is actually detrimental to the cover, to the surface, to the swimmers, to the environment, all kinds of stuff. So it's very important to test and make sure that the water is healthy to swim in and enjoyable by all.
Good. So we test to establish a baseline, but we're going to cover that in a little bit. What we're going to go over what we test with, kind of interpreting our test results because everybody sees things slightly differently. When to test for the weird things, and then using the test data properly. So, like Matt said, we test for water balance, sanitizer level, or problem-causing elements in the water. Those are pretty generic terms, but we're going to get into the meat and potatoes here just a little bit. I know we've all heard this before. Oh, previous from homeowners or our customers. My water's clear. Why do I need to test it? Matt, what's the de facto go-to on that one?
Acid is clear too, but you wouldn't want to swim in it.
There it is. There's a little bit of ammo you can have in the holster for when people come in and start talking chemical trash at you. So what do we test with? There's a myriad of different things that you can test with, from old the drop tests to digital test readouts to test strips to labs. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of those pros, cons, and kind of give you a good background on why you should probably have more than one method of testing, just for consistency's sake and to cover your butts if there's a power outage or any other goofy stuff like that. So chemical testing labs seem to have picked up a lot of steam in the last 10 years or so, and good reason. It makes it a lot easier. You don't have to be the mad chemist dropping 20 different chemical tests at a station. It takes a lot less time, so you can get your customers taken care of faster. You get your results faster, and generally they're pretty consistent. I say generally because, like everything, maintenance is a part of it. You want to make sure you're taking care of your reagents, make sure they're stored properly, make sure they aren't expired, and make sure you're actually using those tests properly too. So simple, easy to learn. This is good, especially if you've got new staff at the store that doesn't have a pool background. If they're just getting into it, this makes it a little bit easier for them to get their feet wet. Pool pun. Yeah, we're going to sneak some in today too. Um, Couple things to keep in mind. A lot of them are software based, so it depends on the software that you have on your computer of how these results get interpreted. So you need to make sure your software is up to date. You need to make sure that the actual test lab or test station is calibrated properly. A lot of times they'll have special discs or strips to make sure that the laser is picking up the correct color, because a lot of these rely on the same type of reagent that you test with when you do a manual drop test on the pool deck. It's just automating it a little bit and using an electronic eye versus yours. Cost per test can vary depending on the different system used. Some test everything all at once. Others you can specify individual um, segments of water chemistry that you're trying to check. So there's pros and cons on both sides. If you're just going for a broad overview, the one that tests everything, awesome. If you're troubleshooting a pool and you're just looking for one specific issue, or trying to keep up with that, you can kind of see where the disadvantage would be, because if you're just wanting to test alkalinity and you're testing everything, you're technically wasting extra tests on things that you're not wanting to test for. Um, Pros, a lot of times the software will actually tell you chemical suggestions. Hey, this is out of whack. You should add product X to bring that back in line. Awesome. Especially helpful if you've got new staff at the store. But there are some limitations on how you interpret these results, which we talk about a little bit later in this presentation. Um, Old school drop test kits. These are great, tried and true. They've been around forever. They can take a while to get good at, but when you get good at them, you can really rock and roll on these things. Um, it depends on the tester's ability to see color. I actually had a lifeguard that was colorblind. They couldn't test the water because you had to compare the color in the sample versus the color on the comparator. If you can't do that, you can't effectively test water. So we had to adjust um, how they were testing for water balance factors. Pretty inexpensive per test. Um, that's just a nice aspect of it because the reagents aren't relatively expensive. You just got to make sure you take care of them properly. You don't store them in the truck on a 100-degree day. You bring them inside the house because extra heat can degrade them, extra cold can degrade them. So bring them inside. It's just one of those things. A lot of people, they throw it in their truck and forget about it. You should probably bring them inside. It'll give you better, accurate results when you're testing with them. Can give
I think
customers.
that whether you're using the reagent or the spin disc or anything else, that they all have expiration dates too, and it's important to watch those because there's been times in the past where some of the stuff that's delivered from distribution has actually been very close to expiration or even expired. So make sure that everything that you're using is in the proper date to use it, right?
Yep.
And the other part is too, and I think you might be about to cover this, but when you're using the drop test reagents, especially, you want to be consistent with how you hold them, right? You don't hold them at the angle. The best way to
Straight
do it
up
is
and
to have them
down.
straight up and down,
Yep.
right? So that's something else because it needs to be consistent because you can't have them straight up and down on one test and 45 degrees on the other because the amount of reagent that gets in there is different and it changes the colors and makes it harder to read.
Mm-hmm. It gives customers a sense of professionalism because a lot of these tests, they're the types that health departments use when people come out. So, hey, they're testing my pool like they do the neighborhood pool. I'm pretty cool. Um, Chemical corrections rely on the knowledge or reference material. A lot of these different test kits actually have a little packet or information in it that kind of tell you what to do. So that's like the analog version of the digital readouts where it would actually spit out results for what you should do. There's cheapo versions of these types of test kits, all the way up to the professional monster-sized ones that health departments use when they go out to take care of tons of different commercial pools. Test strips. These ones kind of got a bad rap. The they're not as inefficient as people think they are. They've actually gotten better consistency wise over the last couple years, so they're pretty close in terms of when you're testing with them. Um, Very simple to use, which is perfect for homeowners. This is good for spot checks. They're very, very inexpensive. So if you have to test multiple times, this is a good one to go with so you're not breaking the bank doing it. You can train your homeowners to use them properly. On the back of the bottle, it usually says take the test reading at X amount of time after dipping it in the water. Those are good instructions to keep in mind because if you let it sit and keep going, you'll actually get different results that won't be accurate. Um, Yep, same, and they've actually even got commercial grade test strips available now too, that are certified and okay for those. So it really goes to show you the different grade of test strips that are out there. But yeah, not as bad as people think, and totally have a place. Totally have a place out there.
I can tell you when I first started using test strips that I used to dip the test strip with the little pads pointing up until I was told, no, you don't do it that way. If you take it and turn it 90 degrees, that way the different colors from the pads don't run into each other. So you dip it on its side, you pull it up, and then you wait for the amount of time that you're supposed to for the reagents to react the right way, and then you read it. So that way you don't have one color going into the next and making it look like the water's wonky.
And that's a
The
good point
technical term
too,
there.
because technically, if they're doing the testing correctly, that could have affected accuracy the whole time. So the test strips could have always been awesome. It's just people were using them incorrectly. Well, good point. Digital testers, these aren't as prevalent, but they're picking up speed because I mean they're available all over the place now. pH testers are pretty inexpensive. They're pretty simple. The range on these is huge because you can go from $25 all the way up to thousands of dollars depending on what you're testing for. Can be expensive to keep and operate. Calibration can be a bear to keep in line with where it actually needs to be. A lot of times you'll see these service people will use digital testers to establish salt levels in pool. That seems to be a pretty well established one that's been going well for the last couple of years. Um, pH, ORP, those are coming around too. But those testers, the cells that you actually need to test with, the actual electrode where it reads, those are kind of salty in terms of price. So if you want a good one, you're going to have to be prepared to spend a little bit more on it.
It's funny that
Especially
you said that those testers are used a lot to test salt, but the electrodes can get salty.
they can. See,
Yeah,
it works on
yeah,
two levels.
right, right. And the thing about it is that this whole spring training is about helping people that are new to the business or get back into the swing of things for spring. And some of these terms, like when we're talking about ORP and stuff, may not have anything to do with what you're doing in the store, but there are different ways to test. So it really just comes down to what's best for you, what's best for your clientele, and really, how much you want to spend per test. Because I know, seeing from the people that are in here, I know that you can do 60, 80, 100 water tests on a Saturday. And so if you're looking at that saying, well, how fast can I get these done? How long do I want my customers to wait or have to wait? How accurate do I need to be? Those are all things to consider when you're talking about all these different ways to test. So that's just some of the things that you're talking about, that maybe doing a strip test would be awesome because it's cheap and it's fast. But you got to think about, well, I mean, how accurate do I want to do it? Am I using software? Do people want an awesome printout? So it's all those things to consider.
And one fun side note, I've heard from a lot of retailers, they get a little aggravated when customers will come in, get a water test, and then never buy anything. And it's kind of a weird line to walk. I've heard some people say that they've actually changed how they do it slightly, where they'll offer the test strip one for free. But if you want the lab readout, there's either a cost associated with it, or if you buy something, they don't charge you for it. So there's different ways to counter that too, because it can get expensive if you've got people that are just coming in for your knowledge and not paying for your knowledge at the cash register when they leave, if you know what I mean.
And
Specialty,
I
or
think a lot of people that are here will
they know.
understand that, because they have heard people say, "Oh, well, I think I have that," or "My wife bought that last week,"
I've
or
got that in the
"Let me go check what
garage.
I have in my garage."
Yeah,
All that stuff, right? We've heard all of that. So if you have someone that is using you for that knowledge and not buying the stuff, you need to come up with a way to help them
counter that.
without being, without, yeah, to counter it, right?
Yep. Um, Specialty or one-off tests. These are the ones that you pull out from under the counter when normal chemistry isn't functioning. And what I mean by that is if you are taking care of water chemistry issues, and normally 1 + 1 = 2, and all of a sudden 1 + 1 is equaling 4, meaning the normal things that you do day in and day out are not yielding the results that you are used to experiencing. That's when you need to look at the outliers. So you could look at nitrates to see if there's an abundance of nitrates in the water, because that could affect how well your chlorine is effectiveness in the water, how long it can hang out. If there's ammonia levels, which could be causing high combined chlorine levels, which could be affecting how well your sanitizers are performing. Phosphates, which can cause chlorine demand, cloudiness, some other issues as well. Um, Borates, if you're running a borate program and you don't know where your levels are and your pool starts performing erratically, might be time to check those. So it's kind of different with every program you do. And usually in different areas of the country, you'll have different weird, I like to call them the pharmacy tests, where generally you can test the other stuff, over the counter with a test strip or regular testing. The pharmacy ones, you got to go see someone at the counter that knows what they're doing to test those, before you can kind of get an evaluation of what's going on. And that's one of those things where if you're testing for these things because you know it happens in your market, that's where you get to be the authority. And that's where you get to get a little clout when your customers like, oh man, he knew to test for that and no one else did. Um, build your loyalty that way.
And one of the attendees, James, thanks for pointing that out. That there's other stuff to consider too, not just those four. There's also metal tests.
Yep.
especially if you have crazy colors. When all things considered, if everything's balanced and you have crazy colors in your water, you'll have to test for, copper, for iron, even sometimes magnesium or manganese. So there's those things to consider too. Um, and and really, if you go back to the last one, if you want, if you would,
Yeah.
Brett, when you're looking at this stuff, also consider that if you test these and everything seems to be normal, that it's not always chemistry's or chemicals' fault for things that happen. You also have to consider, well, how long do they run their pump? What kind of filter is it? How old is the filter? How
When,
dirty is the filter?
when did they last clean
How
it?
many
Yeah.
things are getting into the pool? Do you have dogs that swim? Do you have a lot of foliage around the pool? That these are all things to consider too, because if most of the time chemistry can fix everything, but if you're doing a test and everything seems to be normal and where it's supposed to be, the people probably aren't telling you everything that's going on with that pool. And so that's where it comes down to, well, the water's balanced. If you're still having a problem, that means it's probably your pump, your filter, or the environment around it, or what kind of swimmers you have, and all those kinds of things. So it's just something to consider, that it's not always chemistry. Okay. All right.
If you
Thanks,
really
Brett.
want, oh yeah, if you really want to wow them with your intellectual razzmatazz, have them bring in a sample of the source water, meaning the water that they fill their pool with, because that can give you a wealth of information. Because just testing that, you can determine if there are balance factors in play, if there's metal coming in constantly, if there's phosphates, if the local municipality sanitizes their water with chloramines. Um, that tells you a boatload of information and how you can adjust what you're going to do to take care of their pool. For example, locally around here where I am, there's different places that the alkalinity comes out of the tap at 220. So if you got a brand new pool and you're just filling it, get ready to add a bunch of acid before you do anything else, just to get it to the place where you can actually adjust and play with the water balance. My
And
calcium
for those
here
of
is
you that don't
ridiculous too.
know, yeah, the calcium and the alkalinity has a real big, um, it's a real big part of the water balance and the water clarity and all that stuff. So when Brett says it's 220 alkalinity, you got to figure that that's about twice as much as it really should be in your pool.
Yep.
So that's definitely something to consider. Now let's go one step even further. Just in case you guys have never thought about this, when I had when I had a retail store, we actually had a whiteboard that said what the most current rain makeup was too, because that way when people come in and they say, "Oh, well, I just treated that. Why do I have to treat that again?" You can say, "Well, the rain that we had on March 8th, this is what the rainwater was." And so if you can collect that rainwater and do a water sample and then throw it up on the wall somewhere, you can point to that and say, "Look, the rain that came down just a couple of days ago had a pH of 4.5 or 4.3, and we know that we had half an inch. So figure that half an inch of water at 4.3 pH, what that does to your pool. That's why you need to use alkalinity again, right? So that's a good way to circumvent some of the issues that you're having, these not like pseudo arguments with people, because they're saying, "Oh, well, I just bought that. Why do I need to do it again? Your stuff doesn't work, or you don't know what you're talking about." You can say, "Well, no, this is what just happened 2 days ago." So anyway, just an idea.
Testing interferences, these vary depending on the type of test that you use, but good things to be aware of because generally these are pretty consistent. Presence of metals can throw off calcium testing. High levels of chlorine can throw off most of the tests, specifically chlorine levels, pH levels, and alkalinities. It can throw off different readings than it's what's actually in there. So you might have to either wait for the chlorine level to come down or use a chlorine neutralizer in your test to get a more accurate result. High levels of cyanuric acid can also give you a false high level of alkalinity that's showing up in your water test as well. So it's not it. Be aware of those because if one thing is really off, it can affect the other test results. So usually when you see a test result that's really out of range, some of the other ones are probably going to be looking funky as well. So take those with a little extra. Hang on, we need to look at these because the computer interprets things in black and white. But we all know that out in the field, it's shades of gray because it's what you have to do to take care of the pool properly. In an ideal world, if you've got a computer brain and you're out there and it says my pH is 7.2, but I want to bring it up to 7.4, I add X amount of soda ash, and that's all I need to do. But that doesn't take into account of all the other factors going in. So sometimes you have to interpret your readings a little bit different. So we've already mentioned some of these in previous slides, but different ways you could get interference. You want to make sure you're testing from below the water level. If you can, about 18 inches, which is good because you want to do it away from returns where fresh chemicals are coming in or anything else like that. So you get a decent read of what's going on in the majority of the body of the water. How old is the sample? Did your customer leave it in the car all day? Because that can definitely affect what shows up on your tests. Was the sample container clean? Well, I just drank the rest of my Fanta and filled up the bottle to bring it into the store. That sugar and acid, carbonic acid from the soda isn't going to cause any problems, is it? Well, it might. And your sample looks red, so I'm not going to test this one. Um, is your lab updated? Is your stuff not expired? Chemical interference, like we talked about. How do you store your test kits? So, like we said, don't store them in really hot, bright environments because you can degrade things. So, chemical labs seem pretty cool, right? So if I get one of those and I get new staff, I can just turn them loose on my customers with the test results. Here's where the interpretation comes in. So obviously we've got a test result here where there's some things going on. There's a couple things that could potentially be causing different readings that aren't quite accurate as well. We've got a high sanitizer level up here. Our pH is really high. Our alkalinity is really high. Our hardness is super low. I would question almost everything on this test. Just would. And you see stuff like that. And if you've been doing pool stuff long enough, you should question that. That should be, man, this looks really funky. It might require you to test these things individually and take into account some of the other things that we talked about, like really high sanitizer might be throwing off these other levels. They're good because it gives you a good snapshot, and this could tell you, oh man, this when you test someone's water, feel free to be like, whew, you got some things going on here. Remember your chemistry basics. We're shooting for ranges. You're never going to hit perfect. If you've got a type A customer that wants perfect water chemistry, they're going to hate having a pool because they're going to be beating their head against the wall every day, adding tiny little doses of this and that. And eventually those are the ones that usually make chemical soup. So really try and drive home. We're shooting for ranges to try and keep your pool running good as long as possible. And these are good because you could save your chemical results and use them as a reference point for the next time they come in to see, oh my gosh, the same thing's happening. So, like we talked about, these computers, they got computer brains. This is happening. We've got a problem here. We want to make sure we add enough to take care of it. Make sure you're interpreting these things. Because if you're getting contradicting things, like if it's saying add soda ash and acid at the same time, you shouldn't do both. You should do one first, wait some time, and then do the other one. But a lot of times that nuance isn't specifically in the computer readout. Interpreting, we've kind of gone over this a lot. We actually put our programs in the WaterLink Solutions Pro last year. So we've got our Easy Pool Pepper and Easy Spa profiles built right in there. So if you're using this software, you can actually download those and put them right in. If you want extra help on that or have questions, feel free to reach out to us after this one. And then when to test for outliers. So those really weird ones. If things aren't reacting to normal stimulus. That's the best rule of thumb. If you're trying to treat something and you're not getting a result that you should be getting, that's when you should break out the extra tests because you don't want to beat your head against the wall day in and day out trying different things and eventually making chemical soup. Man, jumping right onto these next slides before I get there. Attempt to stay within chemical ranges. We covered this one. This is a good one. We make several products that actually help maintain all of these factors. We're going to talk more about these individually as we go on today. The last class is actually best practices, so we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes about how to properly use our products. But if you're using products that keep things in check proactively, generally your water tests are going to be a lot easier to read because they're going to be good. How about that? And there's a little shameless plug down there. We are doing a spring training show bundle. This is pretty simple. If you guys do the Oxy Splash bundle, 2 cases of Revive Weekly, 2 cases Ezyme Pro, and 2 cases Oxy Splash, we'll actually send you out a case of Revive Weekly pints. All you got to do is email into Stacy. What email address did you want them to email to?
Customer support at apiwater.com. You can, if you have my email address, you can also use that. I'm just hesitant to give it because there's an E in my name and often it's overlooked. So if you omit the E, I won't get the email.